Most of the cadets drifted away to resume their training, yet 2 remained behind. One of them was Ho Sanghwa, the 222nd cadet, a girl renowned as one of the top 3 among the female cadets in terms of pure strength. With determination burning in her eyes, Sanghwa dropped to her knees before Yeowun. She felt deeply moved after hearing how Yeowun had risked his own life for a subordinate, and her heart strengthened with conviction as she declared that she had heard of his willingness to accept followers without bias toward gender or sect. Sanghwa offered herself to him, vowing that if he allowed her into his group, she would dedicate her entire life to him. Ko Wang-hul, who knew her well, watched with surprise. Beside him, Baekji stared curiously at Wang-hul's reaction, puzzled by the unexpected blush rising on his friend's cheeks. A moment later, another cadet stepped forward and sank to both knees. Jin-guk confessed that his martial arts skills were still lacking, yet he wished to offer something far more valuable: his full loyalty. Yeowun regarded the young man calmly. He believed that skill could always be trained and nurtured, and what mattered more was the willingness to stand by his side. Gratitude stirred within him as he accepted Jin-guk into the group. However, he stiffened slightly when Jin-guk bowed until his forehead touched the ground, introducing himself formally as the eldest son of the Jin family, and vowing eternal loyalty to Lord Cheon Yeowun. Wang-hul and Baekji exchanged glances, seeing a familiar earnestness in Jin-guk that reminded them of Hobam. Yet Hobam himself stared at the scene with disbelief, shaking his head as if Jin-guk's dramatic display went far beyond anything he expected. Wang-hul reflected inwardly that their group still lacked 3 members, yet he believed the recent displays of loyalty would draw more interest soon. With Yeowun now carrying a yellow badge, he felt certain that the remaining positions would eventually be filled. Yeowun scanned the area, wondering about the absent cadets, and prompted Wang-hul for answers. Wang-hul urged him to move to a quieter place before explaining anything further. Once they gathered at the mountainside, Wang-hul informed him that Wang-chun and Ho Daming had departed from the group. At the mention of those names, irritation flared among the others, their reactions full of disappointment and anger. Yeowun, however, remained composed. He listened without judgment and nodded calmly before expressing genuine gratitude toward Machael and Wooman for their efforts in recruiting new members. They responded with earnest humility, relieved and grateful that Yeowun had returned unharmed. Yeowun then noticed another absence and asked about Ojong. His question drew silence from Hobam, who still carried guilt for allowing Ojong to be harmed. The other cadets stiffened with anger at the memory, and their reactions made Yeowun realize that something more serious had happened. In response, Wang-hul carefully explained every detail of the incident and described how Ojong had been injured badly enough to end up in the infirmary. Yeowun's gaze hardened into something sharp and cold, yet not furious. Baekji watched him closely and felt a jolt of surprise. The Yeowun before him was no longer the reckless boy who would have erupted in anger just 5 days ago in the medical room. His restraint made Baekji realize how much he had changed. Wang-hul studied Yeowun's expression and cautiously asked what he planned to do. Yeowun considered the situation inwardly. The academy had designed these yellow badges to provoke conflict, so he did not entirely blame the attacker for resorting to an ambush. However, he understood that his followers would not easily forgive such an act, and their anger left him with little choice but to respond. With that clarity, Yeowun addressed his group. A spark of anticipation burned in his eyes as he acknowledged that the enemy had struck first. Now it was time to return the favor. Baekji, watching the sudden shift, realized that perhaps Yeowun had not changed as much as he thought. 2 hours earlier, a large open space behind the Northeast Training Hall was filled with 20 cadets practicing the 7-demon sword. At the center of them stood Wu Penghak, the same cadet who had attacked Baekji from behind during the fight against Ha Ilming the previous night. As the unofficial leader of the group, Penghak prepared to head out, prompting Galen, the 671st cadet, to ask in worried hesitation if Penghak was truly planning to go alone. Penghak insisted that he had been instructed to go alone, leaving them with no alternative. Galen still felt uneasy, a lingering sense of dread warning him that something about this situation was wrong. Penghak, however, brushed off his concern and reminded him that possessing even one yellow badge meant they had the chance to form a new group. Galen hesitated, pointing out that a single badge could not secure positions for all 20 of them. Such an imbalance might eventually push them into fighting among themselves. Penghak countered that standing idle would accomplish nothing, and that they had to act if they intended to survive within the Academy's harsh system. Galen reluctantly agreed, though his worry persisted. Penghak continued, explaining that reaching the top required any advantage they could seize, even if it involved using questionable tactics. He believed that surrendering simply because they were weaker would only guarantee their elimination. Galen still felt troubled, especially about their decision to treat their former group leader as a tool for negotiation. The thought weighed heavily on him, but Penghak dismissed the concern with cold pragmatism. What had been done could not be undone, and he urged Galen to leave the rest to him. Once Penghak secured the position of group leader, he promised just to ensure Galen had a place beside him. Penghak stepped forward, preparing to leave and meet Yeowun, but before he could take more than a few steps, a figure moved into his path. He stopped abruptly as a cold voice halted him, and shock spread across his face the moment he recognized who stood before him. Penghak stammered, unable to understand why Yeowun was here. None of them had known that Yeowun had been released from prison, and the surprise only deepened when 7 more cadets appeared behind him. Baekji stood among them, his scarred eye and cold gaze locked onto Penghak as he demanded to know whether Penghak had been the one to betray him. The accusation made Penghak stumble backward, trembling at the murderous intensity directed at him. The former members of the 12th group rushed over when they realized Yeowun and his followers had arrived. Fear flooded their faces as they sensed the confrontation escalating. Penghak shouted anxiously, demanding to know if they had come for revenge, but before Yeowun could respond, Wang Ho stepped forward with unwavering anger. He reminded them that they had launched a cowardly ambush and it was only natural that they now face consequences. Whispers spread rapidly through the 12th group cadets. Panic rippled among them as they recalled Yeowun's reputation. They knew that dealing with Baekji had already been a nightmare, but Yeowun's retaliation was something far worse. Some whispered nervously about how Yeowun was known for crushing the lower abdomen of anyone who pushed him too far, and how countless students had ended up in the infirmary because of him. Penghak tried to regain control of the situation and shouted at his members, insisting that they outnumbered Yeowun's group and had nothing to fear. Yeowun exhaled slowly, almost disappointed, and noted that Penghak was the true fool for boasting so carelessly right in front of him. Before anyone could react, Yeowun moved. His body shot forward with such speed that Penghak had no time to defend himself. Yeowun seized his wrist, tightening his grip with controlled force, while reminding himself repeatedly to restrain his strength. Even so, when his fist struck Penghak's stomach, the impact launched the cadet backward. Blood burst from Penghak's mouth as his eyes widened in shock, and his body lifted off the ground, hurtling through the air before crashing down at a distance. The watching cadets froze, stunned into silence by the overwhelming display of power. Galen screamed Penghak's name, horrified at how swiftly he had been defeated. Before he could rush forward, Hobum stormed up to him with eyes burning red, grabbed the front of his collar, and demanded to know where the stolen tag was. Galen, trembling under Hobum's grip, finally admitted that the tag had been taken by Ha Ilming, student 108. The moment the name was spoken, Wang Hul exhaled in frustration, confirming what they had all suspected. Yeowun's gaze hardened. He knew Ha Ilming well enough to understand that someone so greedy would never allow such a prize to fall into anyone else's hands. Hobum let out a sharp grunt and drove his fist into Galen's face. He pushed Galen to the ground and prepared to strike him again, but Baekji intervened and stopped him. Hobum shouted in anger, demanding to know whether Baekji was defending Galen only because they had once been teammates. Baekji denied it, explaining that he had a question to ask first and ordering Hobum to step aside. Baekji fixed his gaze on Galen and demanded to know what he meant when he said they had sold him out. Galen, trembling, admitted that it had been young Master Yeowun of the Saber sect who ordered them to attack Baekji and steal their group's yellow badge, intending to put Baekji in a difficult position. The mention of Cheon Yeowun's name caught Yeowun off guard. Baekji, meanwhile, felt stunned. He had believed Yeowun had helped him sincerely the previous night, never realizing the manipulation had been deliberate from the beginning. Baekji asked whether they had been promised a yellow badge as payment for their betrayal. Galen could only apologize, unable to justify what they had done. Baekji turned away with cold disgust, unable to forgive them. Hobum then released a sharp breath and resumed beating Galen, determined to inflict the same pain that Ojong had endured. Wang Hul stepped in before Hobum could strike again. Hobum groaned in frustration, exhausted and irritated, but stopped when Wang Hul placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Through a silent telepathic message, Wang Hul questioned whether venting his anger on a single cadet would truly satisfy him and urged him to trust his plan instead. He explained that if they acted wisely, they could draw out every culprit responsible and punish them all at once. Hobum, breathing heavily, understood the intention and stepped aside. Wang Hul then turned to Galen, who lay bruised on the ground. He asked whether Galen genuinely believed the promise Yeowun had made to him. Galen hesitated, confused by the question. Wang Hul pressed further, asking if he truly expected Cheon Yeowun to hand over a yellow tag as promised. Galen insisted that Yeowun had indeed made such a promise. Wang Hul responded calmly, pointing out that Yeowun must have seen that their group had 20 members. If Yeowun were being honest, he would have had to promise them 2 yellow badges to accommodate all of them. His words struck Galen with sudden clarity, and the shock on his face confirmed that Wang Hul's guess had exposed the truth. The cadets who had not participated in the ambush frowned immediately as realization dawned. Confusion and betrayal spread among them as they demanded answers from Galen, reminding him that he had told them each would have a guaranteed guaranteed place on the new team. The cadets of the 12th group turned on Galen with fury, and Wang Hul remarked bitterly that they had all been used and were now turning against one another. The confused cadets demanded to know what he meant, but Wang Hul explained that Cheon Yeowun had known exactly what would happen if he offered only one yellow badge. By fighting among themselves, they were falling perfectly into Yeowun's scheme. The realization made their teeth clench with anger. Wang Hul allowed a thin smile to form as he delivered the final push. If they were truly angry, then the only path left was revenge. Later, to test his theory, Galen and several members of the 12th group approached Cheon Yeowun. Galen reported that they had provoked Ilming into stealing Baek Ji's yellow badge, just as Yeowun had requested. Yeowun responded with feigned curiosity, pretending to forget Penghak's name, and asking whether Galen had become the leader of their group. Galen explained that Penghak was in the infirmary with serious internal injuries, but insisted that this was irrelevant. Yeowun slowly pulled out a yellow badge, assuring Galen that he intended to honor their deal. Then his tone shifted into mockery as he pointed out the problem. They had not fulfilled their part. Galen stared in shock, unable to understand. Yeowun reminded him coldly that their agreement required them to deliver Baek Ji, yet he was nowhere in sight. Galen clenched his fist in frustration and demanded to know what they were expected to do next. Cheon Yeowun responded with a smile, claiming that Baek Ji needed to taste true despair before he could ever be persuaded to join Yeowun's side. He hinted that no one understood true pleasure without first experiencing deep pain. As he considered the situation, he remarked that the 12th group lacked anyone truly fit to be their leader. Galen bristled at the insult, but Yeowun ignored his irritation and called for Yompa. When Yompa eagerly responded, Yeowun announced that he would grant him another opportunity. Yompa asked what he meant, and Yeowun instructed him to gather his men, deal with Baek Ji, and then target Yeowun's entire group to steal their yellow badge. He reminded Yompa not to repeat the foolish mistake he had made last time. Yompa bowed deeply, vowing not to fail again. Yeowun then explained that if Yompa succeeded in taking the yellow badge, he could form a group with the 12th group cadets under Yeowun's leadership, ensuring they all had a stable position. He laughed as he described it as a victory for everyone. Galen seethed inwardly, realizing that Yeowun intended to turn them into his subordinates as well. Later, Galen and Yompa went together to approach Ha Ilming. Yompa approached Ha Ilming and introduced himself. Ilming studied him closely and recognized the cadets standing behind him, the same ones who had helped him attack Baek Ji the previous day. Ilming asked what he wanted, and Yompa responded with a confident smile, explaining that he needed a yellow badge to pass the third examination and wished to ask for Ilming's help. Ilming rejected the request immediately, questioning why he should assist when there was no benefit for him, and told them to leave so he could continue training. Yompa held his ground and revealed that the badge he sought belonged to Cheon Yeowun's group. Ilming's reaction was immediate. He flinched at the mention of Yeowun's name. Yompa continued, explaining that he had unfinished business with Yeowun. He blamed Yeowun for the hardships he had suffered. If they succeeded in taking the yellow badge, Yeowun's group would be forced to disband. He pointed out that no one would willingly follow a leader whose group had been dissolved twice in a row. If that happened, Yeowun would inevitably fail the third examination and become vulnerable to expulsion. Ilming considered the offer carefully. He still wanted to finish what he had started the day before, but he acknowledged that Yeowun was far stronger than he had expected. Bringing him down would require a combined effort. Ilming agreed, and Yompa assured him the decision would not be regretted. When Ilming asked when they should begin, Yompa answered with a confident smirk that the time was now. Ilming's own smile followed, pleased with the decisiveness. With that, their plan moved forward. Hours later, Ilming, Yompa, Galen, and a group of cadets surrounded Yeowun and his followers. Ilming pointed his wooden sword and mocked them for hiding in the mountains as if clinging to the shadows of worn sleeves. Yeowun responded with a calm smile, remarking that he had been planning to look for Ilming anyway and appreciated that Ilming had saved him the effort. Ilming flinched at the unexpected confidence and demanded to know why Yeowun was smiling, questioning whether he understood the situation. He called Yeowun a fool for failing to recognize the danger. Yeowun countered that Ilming was the one who misunderstood what was happening. Ilming's irritation spiked as he demanded clarification. At that moment, Galen and the cadets of the 12th group stepped forward with serious expressions and raised their wooden swords. Galen delivered a stern warning, ordering Yompa and Ilming's side to drop their weapons. Ilming and Yompa froze in shock as the betrayal unfolded right behind them. Yeowun stepped forward and asked once more who the real fool was in this situation. Yompa turned to Galen, demanding to know what he was doing. Galen shouted back, accusing Yompa of believing he could keep manipulating them with the promise of a yellow badge and treating them like fools. Yompa argued that someone must have gotten into their heads, but Hobum immediately retorted with a sharp scoff. He reminded Yompa that he had been unable to take a tag from an instructor and had resorted to ambushing them at night, questioning who truly relied on dirty tricks. tricks. His words only fueled the tension. Ha Ilming exploded with anger at the insult, his face flushing red as he glared at Hobom. He accused Yeowun's group of running from them like rats, and dared to call them weaklings. Wang Hul burst into laughter at the claim, and challenged Ilming, asking if that meant Ilming would never run from them now. Ilming stiffened in shock. Wang Hul followed with a cold warning, making it clear they had no intention of letting him escape. Ilming's expression darkened, his thoughts twisted with panic. He wondered how the situation had spiraled into such chaos. He debated whether to swallow his pride and flee, but he knew abandoning his group would ruin any chance of passing the third examination. But for Yonpa, things were different. Failure would sever his opportunity to serve young Master Cheon Yeowun. Desperate, he searched for any way to defuse the confrontation and escape with his chances intact. Yonpa attempted to salvage the situation, insisting that Galen must have misunderstood. He reminded the cadets that young Master Yeowun had personally promised to accept all of them as his followers, and questioned whether they doubted his sincerity. Galen pressed him immediately, asking if that meant Yeowun intended to give them 2 yellow badges. Yonpa froze, caught completely off guard. Galen emphasized that if Yeowun truly planned to take all 19 of them under his wing, they would need at least 2 badges to form a proper group. Yonpa realized the truth in that moment. Their betrayal had been driven by the impossibility of Yuchun's promise. Panic began to set in. If he failed to calm the situation, the entire task would collapse. Yet he also knew he could not attempt to negotiate independently with these cadets. His authority did not stretch that far. Struggling to maintain composure, Yonpa offered a compromise. He claimed he would personally present a proposal to young Master Yeowun to secure 2 badges for them. Galen echoed the words back to him, confirming that Yonpa meant to make such a proposal. Internally, Yonpa smirked. He fully intended to deliver the proposal, ensuring he would not be lying. But whether Yeowun rejected the idea or not would no longer be his responsibility. Galen admitted that Yonpa's proposal sounded appealing, but he questioned whether Yonpa had the ability to follow through. Yonpa demanded to know what he meant, only for a voice from behind to answer. Before Yonpa could react, Cheon Yeowun appeared behind him and launched a fist toward him. Yonpa twisted backward in panic to avoid the strike. Ilming, angered that Yeowun had attacked Yonpa before acknowledging him, swung his wooden sword with 70% of his internal energy, enough force to crush a skull. Yeowun simply raised his left hand and caught the incoming strike. His grip tightened and the wooden sword shattered into fragments. Ilming froze, horrified that the 7-star energy he had poured into the weapon had been rendered meaningless. In the next instant, Baekji shot forward and delivered a powerful kick directly into Ilming's side, sending him skidding across the ground. Pain surged through Ilming as he struggled to rise, realizing that the rib Yeowun had broken earlier had barely healed before the opposite side was now fractured by Baekji's strike. Baekji stared him down, declaring that Ilming would be facing him now. Ilming trembled with fury and humiliation, calling the attack a cheap ambush. Inside, however, he understood the grim reality. There was no winning this battle, but fleeing wasn't an option either. Ilming realized he had no choice but to fight. He shouted for his group members to attack, and they charged forward with loud cries. But as the clash began, Ilming stared in disbelief. His members were not attacking Yeowun's group at all. Instead, they turned their wooden swords on the cadets of the 12th group behind them. He screamed in frustration, demanding to know what they were doing, but his members ignored him. The 12th group stood directly between them and the only exit, and Ilming's people were focused solely on escaping the chaos, not fighting for him. Baekji rushed forward, shouting that Ilming should keep his eyes on the real threat. Ilming cursed and shifted into a defensive stance, but Baekji unleashed a relentless barrage of kicks, striking him repeatedly with brutal force. Wang Hul, wearing a confident grin, flexed his muscles and leapt into the fray. Hobom, eager for revenge, charged in right behind him. Sanghwa smiled with satisfaction as she prepared for her first real fight. Woman urged the others forward, and Machil and Jin Guk rushed to join the assault against Ilming's fleeing group. The mountainside erupted into chaos as nearly 40 cadets clashed. The battle was overwhelmingly one-sided. Ilming's members were desperately trying to escape, while Yeowun's group and the enraged 12th group cadets pursued them with unrestrained fury. Baekji continued his assault, his kicks hammering Ilming's chest repeatedly. Ilming struggled to fight back, but the pain from his newly broken rib slowed him down, leaving him defenseless against Baekji's relentless strikes. Yonpa staggered backward in shock, horrified that the situation had spiraled into the very chaos he had tried to avoid. If he had gathered more allies earlier, he believed none of this would have happened. As he retreated, Cheon Yeowun advanced toward him with the cold, inevitable presence of death itself. Yompa froze as Yeowun warned him that escape was impossible. Yompa collapsed to his knees, trembling, and proclaimed his surrender. He declared Yeowun victorious and begged for mercy, arguing that the outcome was already clear. As a candidate for the minor priesthood, he pleaded for leniency, insisting there was nothing else he could do when defeat was absolute. Internally, he smirked, convinced that no matter how angry Yeowun might be, he would never punish someone kneeling before him. Yeowun shook his head slowly and crouched down. Without hesitation, he grabbed a fistful of Yompa's hair and yanked it violently. Yompa screamed as his head was forced upward. Yeowun told him that surrender meant nothing, and that someone who wished to avoid fighting should never have relied on underhanded schemes in the first place. Yompa panicked and shouted again that he had surrendered, but Yeowun slammed his head into the ground with brutal force, the impact cracking the earth beneath him. The cadets of the 12th group looked on in horror, unable to speak as blood streamed from Yompa's mouth. Yeowun's cold gaze remained unshaken as he warned that no one should provoke others unless they were prepared to face the consequences. Yeowun tightened his grip on Yompa's hair, his voice cold as he warned that this was only the beginning. Yompa screamed in panic and tried to threaten him, shouting that young Master Yuchen Chun would never allow Yeowun to get away with this. Yeowun narrowed his eyes, questioning whether Yuchen would now come after him. Yompa realized too late that he had only enraged Yeowun further. He tried to steady himself with the thought that Yuchen commanded the strongest following in the academy and hoped Yeowun might feel intimidated, but Yeowun simply sighed, thanking Yompa sarcastically for the warning. Yompa's instincts screamed in terror as he remembered too late who he was dealing with, the same person who had crushed Jeongsum Chun. Yeowun told him to worry about himself first, adding that Yuchun did not matter, because he was Yeowun's next target anyway. Before Yompa could process the meaning of those words, Yeowun slammed his head into the ground again. Yompa screamed before collapsing, bubbles forming at his lips as he lost consciousness. Yeowun noted that it hadn't taken much force to knock him out, and that Yompa's skull would have been reduced to pulp had he used his full power. He then approached the remaining cadets who had surrendered and asked for Ilming's location. Baekji pointed toward him and explained that Ilming had resisted too fiercely, so they had struck his verbal pressure point and paralysis point to immobilize him. Ilming gritted his teeth in silent frustration, convinced that he would not have fallen so easily if his ribs had been intact. Baekji asked whether he should release Ilming's verbal pressure point, but Yeowun refused, explaining that there was nothing he wished to hear from Ilming anyway. When Baekji asked what should be done next, Yeowun answered that they would repay him in the same manner he had harmed Ojong. Ilming looked up in confusion as Yeowun crouched to meet his gaze and seized his right hand. Fear flooded Ilming's eyes as he realized what was coming, and the terrifying thought became reality when Yeowun bent one finger sharply backward. A guttural moan escaped Ilming as the bone snapped. The cadets of the 12th group grimaced at the sight, but Yeowun was only beginning. One by one, he bent and snapped every finger backward, each break sending Ilming deeper into agony. Ilming trembled with rage and disbelief at the pain. Yeowun asked if it hurt, while Ilming glared at him with murderous fury. Yeowun remained indifferent to the hostility. He stated that Ojong had likely endured even worse pain, and that he was simply returning what Ilming had inflicted, reminding him that these consequences were of his own making. Ilming writhed and groaned as another sharp wave of pain went through him. Driven beyond restraint, Ilming roared that he would kill Yeowun himself and end his life with his own hands. Yeowun smiled faintly and delivered a powerful slap across his face. The force of the strike whipped Ilming's head backward so violently that his neck nearly snapped, and his immobilized body toppled back with it. His consciousness faded instantly. Yeowun rose and issued a cold order to his group. Each of Ilming's members was to have one leg broken and all of their fingers shattered. His followers brightened with grim satisfaction, eager to avenge what had been done to Ojong. In stark contrast, Ilming's remaining cadets turned pale as dread washed over them. Galen silently thanked his own decision, realizing that had he accepted Yompa's offer, he would have suffered the same fate. Then Ilming's body twitched. Something unnatural began to spread beneath his skin, as thick veins bulged and writhed upward. His rolled eyes shifted, the whites flooding with crimson. When the transformation reached its peak, Ilming let out an animalistic roar and lunged at Yeowun with terrifying ferocity. Hobum's urgent warning echoed sharply across the mountain. An hour later, in the empty space between the 3rd and 4th dormitory buildings, Cheon Yeowun and his teammates were training in the Sword Demon formation using the 7 Demon Sword technique, yet something about the formation felt wrong to him. Yeowun sensed an inconsistency he could not explain. His teammates were all top-level warriors who had learned the technique quickly, so he couldn't blame their lack of mastery. Still, the formation simply did not match what he remembered from the latter half of the 7 Demon Sword manual. He eventually stopped and ordered a break, deciding he needed to study the book again in detail. He then called over Woo Gunpil, the 100th cadet who had been standing aside watching rather than training. Yeowun asked for his honest opinion on how the formation looked. Gunpil hesitated but spoke carefully when Yeowun assured him he could speak freely. He explained that from the outside it looked like the entire group was performing the same movement simultaneously, and he doubted this resembled the true Sword Demon formation. Yeowun agreed and began to comment on what the manual described, but a sudden shout interrupted him. A cadet urgently called for him to look. Yeowun turned to see 20 cadets approaching. Every one of them was severely injured, their bodies battered and bruised. Each carried another cadet on their back, as if they had dragged their fallen comrades from a battlefield. At the front of the group, the cadet being carried hovered on the edge of life, his body limp and bloodied. The one carrying him was battered as well, his face wrapped in cloth as he introduced himself as Yeonpa. Yeowun stared in shock at his battered face, then asked about the cadet slumped over his shoulder. Yeonpa lowered the body to the ground, revealing Ha-Ilming. Ilming's skin writhed with bulging veins, giving his face a grotesque and distorted appearance. One by one, the 12th group members laid down the injured cadets they had carried. Those they set on the ground included Yeowun's 7 followers and 11 members of Ilming's own group. The cadet Galen carried had a face so heavily damaged it had been wrapped completely in cloth. Yeowun recognized Yeowun among the injured and questioned how such damage had occurred. Yeonpa explained that without Ilming's intervention, they all would have died. He claimed Ilming had used the demonic blood reversal art. Yeowun jerked in surprise at the mention of the forbidden technique. The demonic blood reversal art was a dangerous chi circulation method that forcefully amplified strength by reversing the flow of blood through the pressure points. Its repeated use shredded those same pressure points and eventually drove the user into a berserk frenzy. Even within the demonic cult, it was considered a technique that should never be learned. Yeowun dismissed it as a reckless final gambit, concluding that Ilming's uncontrolled rampage must have made him strike indiscriminately at friend and foe alike. He then praised the group with unexpected enthusiasm, admitting he had not expected such results from them. With a satisfied laugh, he suggested that before sending them to the infirmary, they should first sever their tendons. Blade chi shimmered along Yeowun's right hand as he smiled and sliced across the wrist of the cadet he believed to be Yeowun. He remarked with satisfaction that, unlike Yeowun, he did not damage internal energy and that his victim should be grateful for such restraint. Galen watched in disgust, realizing that Yeowun intended not just to defeat Yeowun, but to incapacitate him permanently. Yeowun always made certain his enemies could never rise again, but as Yeowun leaned in to look at the cadet's face more closely, his excitement faltered. His expression tightened with confusion. Something was wrong. The features didn't match. A chill ran up his spine as he whispered Yeonpa's name, suddenly recognizing the deception. Behind him, Yeonpa's true voice echoed, warning that he was too late. Yeowun tried to turn, but bam! A heavy blow struck his face, launching him violently across the training ground. His teammates shouted in alarm as he crashed into the dirt. Gunpil, stunned and furious, charged at Yeonpa demanding an explanation, but a second attack intercepted him. Wang Hul burst forward, his fist descending with tremendous force. Gunpil barely managed to block by crossing his elbows, yet the impact drove him backward until he came to a sliding halt. Wang Hul called out to his comrades without taking his eyes off Gunpil. At his signal, the cadets who had been lying on the ground, supposedly defeated, rose effortlessly to their feet. They exchanged brief remarks about the ruse, satisfied that their plan had worked perfectly. Yeowun's followers stared in disbelief, then anger boiled over as they realized they had been deceived. Yeowun's members were covered in dirt and blood, but not a single one of them had actually been injured. Gunpil's eyes widened as he suddenly realized the 12th group was also standing against Yeowun's team. When he turned, he saw Galen and the other 12th group cadets raising their wooden swords, preparing to fight alongside Yeowun. One of Yeowun's followers shouted furiously at Yeonpa, accusing him of betraying the prince. Yeonpa simply smiled and began unwrapping the cloth from his face. He mocked them for their lack of trust, claiming he never needed to go through such lengths to fool them. As the cloth came off, Yeowun's members stiffened in horror. The face revealed beneath was not Yeonpa at all. It was Cheon Yeowun, the 7th cadet. The truth traced back to the moment Yeowun had defeated the berserk Ha Ilming. After Ilming's transformation, he had charged at Yeowun like a rampaging beast. Before he could reach him, Baekji intercepted with a kick, but the surge of Ilming's amplified energy overpowered Baekji and sent him flying instead. Ilming roared in fury, turning his murderous glare toward Baekji as he prepared to strike him down next. Yeowun refused to let that happen. He seized Ilming's right wrist and wrenched it with alarming ease. Ilming glared at him with pure bloodlust, but Yeowun's movements were far faster. With a single motion, Yeowun flipped Ilming upside down, leaving the cadet staring wide-eyed at the overwhelming display of strength. Even Ilming seemed unable to comprehend what was happening as the world inverted around him. A heartbeat later, Yeowun smashed him into the ground like a shattered puppet. Ilming released a beast-like roar, but Yeowun pounced onto him immediately and drove his fist into Ilming's skull, slamming his head deep into the earth. Yeowun looked down at the cratered ground beneath Ilming's head, noting calmly that the blow should not have killed him. The demonic blood reversal art would have hardened Ilming's body far beyond normal limits. Hobum rushed toward him with frantic concern, asking if he was unharmed. Yeowun reassured him firmly that he was fine and needed no worry. Hobum then stared at Ilming's collapsed form, remarking that this was his first time seeing the demonic blood reversal art in action. Yeowun asked about the rest of Ilming's group, and Wang Hul reported that they had already subdued them and could now send them to the medical room. With their fingers broken and right leg shattered, Ilming and his members would be unable to recover before the third test. Expulsion was inevitable. Hobum stated that they had avenged Ojong and uncovered the true mastermind behind everything, and he began to express his desire to take the next step. But Wang Hul abruptly stopped him, urging him to calm down. He understood Hobum's anger, but reminded him that challenging Cheon Yeowun now was impossible. They were still outnumbered. Wooman agreed, explaining that they needed at least comparable manpower to stand a chance. Moreover, they required at least 2 additional individuals at the early Ascendant Master level to match Yuchun's strength. Sanghwa added confidently that if she and Wang Hul fought side by side, they could defeat an early Ascendant Master together. Wang Hul blushed at her remark. Galen then stepped forward hesitantly, offering the support of the 12th group if they needed more men. Yeowun asked whether they truly had the strength to confront Cheon Yeowun and the masters under him. Wang Hul admitted they could, but even if their master level ally handled Yeowun, another master warrior would still remain. Yeowun responded calmly that he would handle both. When the others stared in disbelief, he clarified that he did not intend to face them simultaneously. He then explained his plan in detail, and that plan was now unfolding perfectly as they deceived everyone present. Shock spread through the ranks of both factions as Yeowun's disguised voice shifted from Yompa's tone to his own. Some cadets screamed that he must have learned some sinister magic. Jin Yu flew into a rage when he realized they had been tricked and charged directly at Yeowun. A faint chi glow enveloped Jin Yu's fist, revealing that he had reached the master level. Gunpil shouted at him to stop, but Jin Yu had already reached Yeowun. Yeowun raised a single finger and executed a sword-like motion, effortlessly intercepting Jin Yu's powerful strike. Jin Yu's mind reeled at how easily his attack had been countered. In the same moment, Yeowun's hand shot forward and plucked the yellow tag from Jin Yu's chest. He declared he was taking it. Jin Yu snarled in fury, raising both fists in an attempt to overwhelm him and shouting for Yeowun's death. But before he could land a blow, Yeowun's fist met his chest with a clean, precise jab. The simple strike fractured Jin Yu's chest bones and sent him stumbling back nearly 10 steps. Yeowun prepared to finish Jin Yu, but Nano's voice suddenly echoed in his mind, warning him of a powerful energy source approaching from 60 meters behind. Yeowun instantly understood what it was. He shouted for his members and the 12th group cadets to get down. Every cadet dropped flat without knowing why, just moments before a streak of white blade chi sliced through the air above them. The cadets gasped in shock, realizing they would have died had Yeowun reacted even a moment later. The blade chi continued straight toward Yeowun. He raised his finger, sword chi flaring, and with a single downward slash of pure energy, he cut through the incoming attack. The exchange was far beyond the level of ordinary cadets. Yeowun looked ahead and smiled as Cheon Yeowun appeared. Yeowun admitted he had attempted an ambush in return, though it clearly hadn't succeeded. Yeowun taunted him for arriving so slowly, provoking a frown from Yeowun, who asked whether Yeowun had actually waited for him. Yeowun laughed, saying he preferred not to rely on ambushes as an excuse to justify defeat. Yeowun studied him with sharp eyes. He recalled the first time he met Yeowun outside the personal training rooms. Back then, Yeowun had been nothing more than an insignificant brat, yet now he had grown at a shocking rate. Yeowun regretted not cutting off his arm when he'd had the chance and resolved to take one before Yeowun grew any stronger. Tension filled the air as every cadet fixed their gaze on the two leaders, shoulders, praying for victory. Yuchun moved first. He dashed forward with lightning speed, faster than anything the cadets had ever witnessed. Leaping into the air, he unleashed the second formation of his blade skill, Blade of Illusion, the giant slash of the elusive blade, aiming to cleave Yeowun cleanly in two. Yeowun gathered his fingers together and summoned his sword Chi. He had attempted before to channel Chi through his wooden sword, but the blade had been too fragile to withstand such power. Now he shaped the Chi directly with his hand. Their Chi collided in mid-air with a sharp spark as sword met saber. Inwardly, Yuchun was stunned. The illusory saber strike was an intricate technique, one that could not simply be blocked by ordinary sword movements, yet Yeowun had met it head-on. Yeowun believed he had neutralized the attack, but Yuchun's blade Chi twisted unnaturally in mid-trajectory. Yeowun reacted instantly, reinforcing his guard with Chi, but the strike still overpowered him and pushed him back 6 steps. Yuchun's followers erupted in cheers at the sight, while Yeowun's group stiffened, realizing Yuchun's true strength. Yeowun analyzed the exchange. He had disrupted Yuchun's saber form, yet the counterattack had come from an impossible angle. A maneuver like that should have strained Yuchun's arm to its limit. It meant Yuchun had meticulously sharpened the condition of his right arm. Combined with his superior internal energy, the prince possessed enough skill to rival even a high-ranking professor. Yuchun mocked him, claiming he had aimed to sever one of Yeowun's arms with that strike. He told Yeowun to stop fumbling with an unfamiliar sword technique and to use the dancing butterfly technique instead. Yeowun raised his eyebrows, insulted by the remark. Yuchun burst into laughter, claiming he could easily identify the sword skill Yeowun was attempting. Yeowun frowned inwardly. He had been using the countersword movements carved into the blue pearl stone pedestal. Had Yuchun recognized them? But Yuchun dismissed the thought, insisting that Yeowun must have confused the 7 demon sword just as the instructors had, and that such a technique would never work against him. Hearing that, Yeowun felt a quiet wave of relief. Yuchun warned him coldly, declaring that he would allow only 5 forms. If Yeowun insisted on using that awkward sword technique, then within those 5 codified forms, Yuchun promised to sever his right arm. Yeowun replied with calm confidence and proposed a bet. Yuchun raised an eyebrow at the idea, and Yeowun explained that since Yuchun was so certain he could overpower this technique within 5 forms, the wager should favor him. Yuchun demanded the terms. Yeowun suggested that they fight with all of their yellow badges on the line. Yuchun burst into laughter, claiming Yeowun never stopped bringing surprises. He pointed out that he possessed 4 badges and therefore had far more to lose. He added his own condition. If he won, he would take Baekji as his follower. Only then would he agree to the wager. Baekji clenched his teeth in frustration. Yuchun simply refused to give up trying to recruit him. Yuchun asked Yeowun if he accepted the additional condition. Baekji looked at Yeowun, searching his expression for hesitation or fear, but Yeowun's gaze was calm and unwavering. Trust surged through Baekji and he nodded. Satisfied, Yuchun accepted the wager. He stepped forward, promising to give Yeowun the first strike. Yuchun carried himself with arrogant confidence, but Yeowun did not react to any of his provocation. Instead, Yeowun stepped forward with icy composure and suddenly charged a concentrated white glow ignited at his fingertip. Yuchun scoffed inwardly, calling Yeowun a fool for rushing in. In his mind, Yeowun's recklessness would cost him his arm, his follower, and his yellow badge. Yuchun had studied the 7 demon sword dozens of times and believed he knew every weakness as if it were the layout of his own home. With a confident breath, he swirled the blade chi in his right hand and unleashed the 4th blade formation of the Blade of Illusion. His saber chi surged forward to clash with Yeowun's sword movement. But the moment their chi collided, Yuchun's eyes widened in disbelief. Yeowun's technique, initially plain and simple, began to twist in unexpected ways. The straightforward sword movement evolved mid-flow, shifting into strange and powerful variations that Yuchun had never seen in the 7 demon sword manual. The transformation grew more intense with each movement. By the time Yeowun reached the 5th movement, Yuchun realized he could no longer defend properly. He tried desperately to transition into the 5th saber formation to regain control, but Yeowun's shifting sword patterns left him no opening. Yuchun's arm was knocked backward before he could complete the counter. The next instant, Yeowun's formation swallowed him whole. A storm of sword chi tore through the air, each movement slicing past Yuchun with precision. The strikes hit his blood points one after another, sending blood spraying as his body was whipped violently from side to side. His defense crumbled beneath the overwhelming barrage. As Yeowun reached the 24th movement, the final strike that could have severed Yuchun's neck, he redirected the finishing blow at the last moment. Yuchun's scream tore through the training ground, raw and agonized. Every watching cadet stood frozen, stunned, speechless by the sight of Cheon Yeowun being completely overwhelmed. A severed arm dropped from the sky, twitching faintly as if it still clung to life. It was Cheon Yeowun's right arm. Cheon Yeowun Yeowun, candidate of the Blade sect for the minor priesthood, had always hidden exceptional talent beneath his carefree attitude. He was a prodigy who had pushed himself relentlessly, refining his martial arts with extreme dedication. By the time he entered the academy, he had already reached the Ascendant Master level, and his constant training had pushed him to the peak of that realm, shocking every student who witnessed his strength. His followers had believed without question that he would rise to the top of the minor priesthood. Now that prodigy knelt on the ground, screaming. Blood gushed from the stump where his arm had been cut, and his face drained of all color as he hurriedly pressed his blood points to slow the bleeding. Yeowun looked down at him and declared his victory. Yeowun's followers stared in horror. Disbelief washed over them, followed by dread. The student they had believed invincible had been defeated so decisively they could not comprehend it. Gunpil and the other members of Yeowun's team rushed forward in panic, but they froze when Yeowun's sword chi pointed directly at Yeowun's remaining arm. With a cold glint in his eyes, Yeowun warned them to stop, threatening to sever the second arm if they took even one more step. Terror spread across their faces as they backed away, realizing he fully meant what he said. Yeowun then ordered them to hand over the badges. He reminded Yeowun coldly that he had lost the bet. Yeowun stared at Yeowun in a daze, unable to comprehend how the tables had turned so violently. His voice trembled as he demanded to know what Yeowun had done. Yeowun responded with calm indifference, asking what he meant. Yeowun's confusion deepened as he questioned how such a devastating formation could come from the simple seven-demon sword. Yeowun smiled coldly and told him that if that was all Yeowun thought of the technique, then he still had a long path ahead before he was qualified to discuss sword arts with him. The tone was identical to the way Yeowun once spoke to Yeowun at the training rooms, and the realization made Yeowun freeze. Inside, Yeowun trembled. He had devoted his entire life to becoming the minor priesthood candidate, yet here he was, defeated, maimed, and humiliated. Grinding his teeth, Yeowun ordered his team to hand over all the yellow badges. His followers' faces darkened with despair. Giving the tags away meant losing their eligibility for the third test, but Yeowun had made a promise and they were bound to uphold it. With a weak, hate-filled glare, Yeowun warned that this would not be the end for Yeowun before collapsing from blood loss. Gunpil snatched his own badge and handed it to Yeowun while glaring sharply at him. He opened his mouth to deliver a warning, but Yeowun's fist struck him in the stomach before he could finish. Gunpil collapsed, coughing blood and struggling for air as he gasped that they had kept their promise. Yeowun replied that he had never promised to stop after taking the badges. Gunpil stared up at him in shock. Yeowun then glanced at the unconscious Yeowun and remarked that he had learned something valuable from him. Never leave loose ends. Gunpil tried to speak through the pain, calling Yeowun an evil man for continuing despite their loss. Yeowun struck him in the face before he could finish, knocking him unconscious. He looked down at Gunpil with cold disgust, rejecting the accusation. He pointed out that Gunpil's group had done the same without hesitation, yet somehow he was the one being called evil. He dismissed the hypocrisy with contempt. Yeowun then ordered his followers to subdue the remaining enemies and break their arms and legs. His members and the 12th group cadets charged in immediately. Within moments, Yeowun's entire team had been destroyed, with only a few managing to flee at the start of the fight. Once everything had settled, Yeowun called Galen over as he was preparing to transport the injured enemies to the medical room. Yeowun handed him 2 yellow tags. Galen stared at them in disbelief, unable to understand why Yeowun would give them away. Yeowun explained that keeping extra badges served no purpose for him and that he had no use for them. As Yeowun walked off, Galen remained deep in thought. He realized that Yeowun had nothing to gain from such an act of generosity. It became clear to him that Yeowun was aiming for far greater heights, and that by standing with Yeowun, they would naturally become enemies of the Saber sect. If that was the case, then helping Yeowun rise to the minor priesthood was the only rightful choice. Galen and the 12th group dropped to their knees as one. When Yeowun turned back, he asked what they were doing. The cadets pressed their heads to the ground and pledged their loyalty, begging him to accept them. A faint smile touched Yeowun's face. Baekji remarked that everything had once again unfolded exactly the way Wang Hul intended. Wang Hul chuckled, and Hobom admitted inwardly that Wang Hul was far more intelligent than he appeared. Cries of pain echoed through the medical room. The usually quiet infirmary was flooded with injured cadets. Though the third test was still days away, the place had become overcrowded. One man, however, was secretly delighted. Dr. Baek Jongmeng felt as if paradise had come to him. Ever since Yeowun had been thrown into the prison cave, the infirmary had been dull. But now, immediately after Yeowun's release, waves of new patients were arriving. There were so many that Jongmeng had to prioritize who to treat first, and he couldn't be happier. While he grinned broadly as he tended to the wounded, Instructor Samong watched him with deep disapproval. Samong frowned, wondering how anyone could smile at the suffering of injured students. He turned away, disgusted. One instructor tapped Samong on the shoulder and muttered that this situation was unbelievable. Only yesterday, they had carried Yeowun in with internal injuries. Samong exhaled and said that no one could have predicted that Yeowun would turn into such a monster so quickly. Jongmeng shouted at them from across the room, telling the professors to stop chatting and help hold down a patient. They rushed to assist. Oh-jung lay on one of the beds nearby, struggling not to laugh. Inwardly, Oh-jung felt overwhelming admiration. He vowed with all his heart that he would remain loyal to Yeowun until the very end. Ilming was the only one not taken to the medical room. Instead, on the way there, he had been diverted into a separate chamber, the office of the chief of the demonic academy. His unconscious body lay naked on the floor. Left guardian Lee Haming stood over him with a grim expression. Haming confirmed that the distorted veins and twisted energy patterns could only be the result of the demonic blood reversal art. He placed his hand over two of Ilming's blood points, and a soft glow spread from his palm. The light sank into Ilming's body, gradually restoring his disrupted blood flow. The bulging veins receded, and the unnatural crimson faded from his skin. Moments later, Ilming jolted awake with a harsh cough. Hameng noted calmly that Ilming had regained consciousness. Ilming opened his eyes and saw a red-haired man sitting beside him, the chief himself. Shock rippled through him as he addressed Hameng with alarm. Pain surged through his skull as he recalled Yeowun's fist slamming his head into the ground before he lost awareness. Confused, he asked why he had been brought here. Hameng dismissed the question immediately, stating that he was the one who would be doing the questioning. Then his gaze sharpened as he demanded to know how Ilming had learned the forbidden demonic blood reversal art. Ilming stared at his own body in confusion, realizing the veins had vanished. He could not understand how Lee Hameng had discovered his use of the demonic blood reversal art. In panic, he claimed ignorance, insisting he didn't know what Hameng was talking about. Hameng responded with a cold snort. With a simple gesture, an invisible force lifted Ilming into the air as if he weighed nothing. Ilming flailed helplessly, shouting in terror and calling out to the chief for an explanation. Hameng flicked his finger, and Ilming's left arm twisted grotesquely like a rag doll. Ilming's scream of agony never escaped the room. The entire office was sealed under Hameng's overwhelming energy. Hameng recited Ilming's registration details in a chilling tone. Ha Ilming, the 108th cadet listed as part of the Red Martial Sword Clan, officially unaffiliated with any other sect. With his forbidden technique exposed, Ilming knew he could no longer pretend ignorance. Hameng continued coldly. Mastering a lost and dangerous art at such a young age meant someone had taught him. That alone placed his entire sect under suspicion. If exposed, the repercussions would destroy everything tied to him. Hameng snapped his fingers again, this time twisting Ilming's right leg. Ilming's agonized cry echoed only inside the sealed room. Hameng approached, gripping the cadet's chin and glaring at him. He revealed the truth he already knew, that the Million Sword Sect was secretly connected to the Sword Sect and was one of the hidden Shadow Sword forces. Ilming cursed inwardly, realizing he had underestimated the left guardian's reach. Before Hameng could press further, Ilming bit down violently. Blood filled his mouth as he tore through his own tongue, attempting suicide. Hameng forced his mouth open and tried desperately to stabilize his internal energy, but Ilming reversed the flow of chi in one last suicidal act. Nothing could save him. In his final moments, Ilming raged inwardly at the bitter fate of dying as a slave to a sect he despised. Then his body went still. Later that evening, around 50 cadets gathered outside the cafeteria. When they spotted a figure approaching the dormitories, they shouted in excitement. Yeowun descended with more than 25 followers behind him, and a wave of astonished murmurs swept through the crowd. Dozens of cadets rushed toward him at once, eager for his attention. Hobam and the others quickly stepped in to block them. Hobam roared for them to get in line, and the group fell silent instantly. He stood before the cadets like a gatekeeper, demanding discipline before they even attempted to approach Yeowun. Wang Ho praised him for the display, and Woman noted how naturally Hobam fit the role and even added a word of approval. Behind their calm remarks, Wang Hul reflected on how quickly the academy had spread rumors. Yeowun had defeated Professor Ho, crushed Cheon Yeowun, and risen as a dominant contender for the minor priesthood alongside Muyan of the Shadow Sect. It was only natural that the academy now swarmed around him. Yeowun patted Hobam for getting the group back in line, and Hobam's eyes lit up as he thanked him for the praise. The cadets stood in formation as Yeowun's gaze swept across them. The cadet at the very front dropped to both knees, declaring his intention to join. Shock rippled through the crowd, and one after another, the cadets behind him also knelt, voicing their desire to follow. Yeowun addressed the gathering with clarity and purpose, making a distinction that stunned the crowd. He stated that he was not searching for temporary members, simply looking to pass an examination. He wanted followers, people who would remain remain by his side to help build a new age for the demonic warrior cult. The path, he said, would be harsh, but he would walk it with them, and if any lacked the resolve to join him in that cause, he would politely refuse their request. Yeowun finished his declaration with a respectful bow. The gathered cadets murmured among themselves, weighing their intentions. One by one, those who had come merely to secure an easy path through the third test quietly backed away. Contrary to expectations, most did not leave. When the crowd settled, 26 cadets remained standing before him. Among them, the 508th cadet, Yu stepped forward and knelt. He admitted that his original intention had been to join solely for the test, but Yeowun's conviction had reshaped his resolve. His voice carried sincere determination as he pledged his desire to follow Yeowun instead. Yu was not alone. 8 others found their hearts swayed in the same moment, choosing loyalty over convenience. Then a lone cadet raised his hand to request an audience. Woman stiffened the instant he recognized the face. It was Moon-ku. Panic surged through him, and he sent an urgent telepathic warning to Yeowun. Woman insisted that this was someone Yeowun had to avoid at all costs. Yeowun, calm and focused, questioned the warning. Woman explained that Moon-ku was no ordinary cadet. He was the grandson of Yeon-mun, the 9th elder of the demonic cult, one of the 12 pillars who stood directly beneath the patriarch himself. Except for elders originating from the 6 main sects, every other elder had earned their position solely by strength and merit. Yeon-mun was one of those legends. As a descendant of the demonic dragon palm sect, he had risen to the position of elder through his achievements during the war between the demonic cult and the righteous factions. His mastery, influence, and decisive victories had elevated his sect to rival the 6 main sects in prestige. Because of that lineage, candidates for the minor priesthood considered recruits from his bloodline to be invaluable. Yeowun recognized Moon-ku immediately, having noticed him during the earlier tests. The cadet limped as he stepped forward, bitterness hardening his expression. He asked if Yeowun held 6 yellow tags, and when Yeowun nodded, Moon-ku's voice trembled with frustration as he declared that one of those tags originally belonged to him. Moon-ku explained how he had earned his yellow tag on the 3rd day, only for Cheon Yeowun to approach him afterward, demanding that he join his group. Moon-ku refused, stating he did not side with anyone. But Yeowun returned twice more, pressing the same offer, and each time Moon-ku turned him down. Eventually, Yeowun challenged him to a duel. Moon-ku accepted, but the difference in power was too great. He lost, and Yeowun broke his left leg and right arm before threatening him. If he refused to join Yeowun's group, he would fail the test entirely. Baek-ji spat in disgust as he listened, calling Yeowun a mad bastard. Moon-ku confessed that he had hoped to recover and take revenge after joining another group, but no one would accept him with his broken limbs. Tears filled his eyes as he admitted that he had been rejected again and again. The moment someone offered to take him in, Yeowun secretly made a deal with that group's leader, and the offer was withdrawn within an hour. Hobum scowled with revulsion, relieved that Yeowun had severed Yeowun's arm after hearing what the prince had done. Moon-ku explained that regardless of how the 3rd examination ended, he had planned to seek revenge on Yeowun after recovering. Hearing that Yeowun had already severed Yeowun's arm left him unsure whether to feel relieved or disappointed, but the truth remained the same. With bitterness tightening his voice, he insisted that Yeowun was now responsible and must take him in. Yeowun listened calmly and asked how Moon-ku had reached the conclusion that he was obligated to care for him. Moon-ku immediately dropped to his knees, apologizing as emotions from all his suffering overwhelmed him. Despite his broken limbs, he begged Yeowun not to reject him, insisting he had much more to offer. Yeowun then asked the real question, whether Moon-ku intended to join him permanently on his journey, or if he merely needed a group temporarily. Moon-ku fell silent. His grandfather's teachings resurfaced in his mind, reminding him to remain neutral within the academy, and to observe anyone carefully before dedicating himself as a follower. After struggling with the weight of that guidance, Moon-ku lifted his head. He asked if he could join Yeowun's group for now, while he decided whether he wished to become a true follower. He promised that his decision would not take long. Yeowun responded without hesitation, refusing him immediately. Moon-ku froze when Yeowun rejected him so firmly, completely unprepared for the answer. Woomin immediately stepped forward, pleading on Moon-ku's behalf, but Yeowun remained unmoved. Woomin then spoke through a telepathic message, urging Yeowun to reconsider, revealing that Moon-ku was a rare martial talent whom every minor priesthood contender would fight desperately to recruit. He argued that if Moon-ku had been strong enough to become a group leader while carrying the bloodline of the 9th elder, then taking him in even temporarily would be a strategic advantage. He insisted that someone willing to kneel with broken limbs was almost certain to become a true follower eventually. Yeowun, however, refused to be swayed by sympathy or talent alone. He reminded Woman that he had rejected many cadets already and could not betray his own standards simply because Moon-ku happened to be accepted. exceptional. Mun-ku, flustered and uneasy, asked for 3 days to think. Yeowun declined. He then asked for 2 days, desperate for any compromise. Yeowun's expression tightened as he questioned why Mun-ku was trying so hard to join his group. Mun-ku hesitated, unable to form an immediate answer. Yeowun silently commanded Nano to analyze his facial expression. Augmented reality activated within Yeowun's vision, white lines tracing the contours of Mun-ku's face, as the cadet struggled to explain that he wanted more time to understand what kind of leader Yeowun truly was. Yet as Nano attempted the scan, an unexpected error flashed across Yeowun's mind. Nano reported that analysis was impossible. The facial muscles were obstructed by artificial skin. Yeowun continued observing Mun-ku as Nano's alert processed the anomalies in the cadet's appearance. The skin behind Mun-ku's ears and around the neck did not match the rest of the face. It resembled a human skin mask. Yeowun wondered why someone would go so far to hide their true appearance. Nano completed its deeper scan, focusing on the areas not covered by artificial skin. It estimated the target to be between 15 and 17 years old, and revealed that the target's gender was female. The revelation stunned Yeowun. Mun-ku, watching him carefully, noticed his gaze drifting toward her neck and ears. She panicked inwardly, convinced that no one, not even Left Guardian Lee Ha-meng, had noticed her disguise. She refused to believe Yeowun could. Then Yeowun spoke in genuine confusion, murmuring that she was a girl. Mun-ku choked on her breath, her face heating beneath the mask. She immediately bowed, flustered and desperate, shouting that she no longer needed time to consider. She wished to join his group right away. The cadets around them stared, bewildered by her sudden decision. Mun-ku sent a frantic telepathic message to Yeowun, begging him to discuss the matter of her identity privately at a later time. Yeowun sighed but nodded in agreement, accepting the request. Woman, who had been watching anxiously, brightened with visible relief. He greeted her as their leader, catching himself halfway since Mun-ku was no longer a group leader, and Mun-ku returned the greeting with a calm nod. One by one, Yeowun's members stepped forward to welcome her into their ranks. Mun-ku bowed politely, greeted each of them, and took her place beside Yeowun's group. With 26 new cadets joining, Cheon Yeowun's faction swelled into the largest force within the academy, rising to a formidable 53 members. The weight of this number settled in Yeowun's mind, reminding him that the time had come to reorganize his growing following. He gathered the cadets and announced that a new structure was necessary, declaring that he would assign several individuals as group leaders. The cadets responded with disciplined enthusiasm as Yeowun began designating names. He first appointed Ko Wang-hul, who accepted with firm loyalty. He then selected Baekji, followed by Ho Sang-hwa, Woomin, and finally Gallon. Through this reformation, Cheon Yeowun solidified his position, becoming the leader of the academy's largest and most unified force. Moments later, behind the adamantine stone training room building, Yeowun met Mun-ku in private. Mun-ku's face flushed with embarrassment as Yeowun quietly acknowledged the resemblance to her twin brother. Mun-ku then revealed the painful history behind it. She explained that before she and her brother were born, her father had been sent on a distant mission, only to be killed in an ambush by the evil faction. The devastating news drove her mother into fatal shock, causing her to pass away during the difficult birth of Mun-ku's younger twin brother, Mun-yu. Mun-ku recounted how Mun-yu had been born with a disability due to the strain of that tragic day, and how her grandfather, overwhelmed by grief and fear, concealed Mun-yu's condition from the outside world. Yeowun regarded Mun-ku with quiet understanding, yet his thoughts carried a firm clarity. He reflected that while Mun-ku had been blessed with an exceptional talent for martial arts, the truth she carried was too heavy to remain hidden forever, and he questioned the necessity of concealing it for so long. Mun-ku, still weighed down by the burden of her circumstances, explained that the six main sects constantly sought a descendant of the demonic Dragon Palm sect, wishing to claim such a prodigy for their own. Matchmakers had repeatedly approached her with proposals meant to bind her to their factions. She revealed that if her sect's tragedy had been exposed before she entered the academy, everything would have unfolded disastrously. As Yeowun listened, his thoughts sharpened. He recalled that leadership within the demonic Dragon Palm sect traditionally passed only to male descendants. If Mun-ku had been forced into a marriage arranged by those matchmakers, her disabled twin brother, Mun-yu, would have been compelled to enter the academy in her place. The six main sects would not hesitate to manipulate his condition to eliminate him, using his weakness as a convenient tool. Without Mun-yu to succeed the sect, the demonic Dragon Palm sect would fall vulnerable, ultimately becoming absorbed by one of the powerful six main sects. Such an outcome would allow that sect to gain dominance over the remaining five, upsetting the balance of power in the martial world. Mun-ku continued with earnest resolve, explaining that this was why she had made the decision to enter the academy disguised as a male. She had persuaded her sect to allow it purely because she believed that if she excelled here, her strength and accomplishments would be enough to protect both her sect and her brother from political schemes. When Yeowun questioned why she chose to attend under her own name rather than using her brother's, Munku clarified that her actions needed to appear entirely self-directed. If she were eventually exposed, no suspicion or consequences would fall on Munyu or the rest of her sect. She reminded Yeowun that this was the reason she concealed herself behind the human skin mask and pleaded with him to uphold his promise, urging him never to reveal her secret to anyone. Yeowun assured Munku that he would keep her secret, but he then wondered whether she had also been altering her voice. Munku answered with a gentle smile before shifting her tone into a higher, smoother sound, revealing the natural voice she had been hiding. Yeowun reacted with surprise, recognizing immediately that it was unmistakably the voice of a girl. Munku admitted that speaking naturally brought her relief, explaining that forcing her voice into a lower register had strained her throat. As she spoke, she suddenly panicked and glanced up at the darkening sky, remembering something she had forgotten. She retrieved a small bottle from her pocket and explained that it was time to apply the glue for her mask, something she had overlooked while talking. She confirmed that the bottle contained the glue she needed, remarking that the process was tiring because the mask had to be reattached every night to prevent it from coming loose. Munku carefully peeled the edge of the mask from her face. It stretched like soft rubber before lifting away, revealing her true appearance beneath it. Yeowun involuntarily let out a breath of astonishment. A warm flush rose in Yeowun's face as he found himself unexpectedly captivated by her beauty. Munku explained that reapplying the mask had been especially difficult with her broken arm, and expressed relief that Yeowun was there to help. She instructed him to hold the mask up with both hands, guiding him on how to position it. Once he complied, she opened the bottle and began spreading glue across the inner surface of the mask, noting with a small laugh how troublesome the task was. Heat gathered in Yeowun's cheeks, and a bead of sweat slid down as he continued holding the mask for her. Munku finished applying the mask and expressed her gratitude, remarking with a light smile that sharing her secret had proven worthwhile. Once the mask settled back into place, she once again bore her brother's face. Munku, still smiling, explained that she could not train due to her injury, and asked Cheon Yeowun if he planned to use the training room. When he confirmed it, she stated that she would return to the dormitory to rest. She asked for his room number, and after hearing that he stayed in the 7th room of the 4th building, she said she would move her belongings there now that she had joined his group. She then limped toward the dormitory. Yeowun turned toward the training room, but he suddenly halted as a realization struck him. Munku was a girl, and she was now planning to live in the boys' dormitory. The thought left him uncertain about how he should handle the situation. It was the final night to obtain a yellow tag, yet Chun Mukum and his follower, Jaehun, reached their destination without being ambushed. Mukum had only just left the medical room the day before, having spent nearly 10 days recovering, but he still managed to steal a tag from another leader. Exhaustion washed over him the moment he secured it. Jaehun observed that during the 10 days young Lord Mukum had been confined to the infirmary, the other cadets had grown noticeably stronger. He found it difficult to believe that a student from an upper-rank sect had managed to exchange more than 30 forms with the young lord. Yet he also knew that Mukum now possessed internal power worth more than 60 years, gained by consuming a demonic dragon marble, and that the young lord had awakened only to the early stages of transcendent master due to the desperation of that moment. Mukum declared triumphantly that he had secured the yellow badge and urged Jaehun to follow. Jaehun acknowledged the command with unwavering loyalty. Inwardly, Mukum burned with determination, believing that if he wished to defeat the monstrous fighter he had in mind, he needed to strengthen his power enough to handle opponents like the cadet he had just fought with ease. His thoughts hardened with resolve as he promised himself he would catch up to Cheon Yeowun. Later that night in Dormitory 4, Yeowun returned to his room. The lamps were lit and Munku sat on her bed reading the 7 Demon Sword skill book. She acknowledged his arrival and Yeowun responded with an awkward nod. The unease lingered within him as he adjusted to the reality of sharing a room with Munku, who, despite her disguise, was still a girl living among the boys. Yeowun reminded himself that he needed to stay alert whenever the boys changed clothes. The reminder became reality almost immediately. Hobum, drenched in sweat, groaned about the heat and stripped off all his clothes before grabbing a fresh set and sprinting out of the room to wash up. He ran across the dorm completely naked. Yeowun covered his face with his hand, realizing again that this was a boys' dormitory where many cadets rushed to the bath without a single piece of clothing after training. He glanced toward Munku, but she remained focused on the book in her hands. Yeowun asked if she was alright with the situation, and Munku answered answered that she had experienced it countless times and had grown used to it. Yet Yeowun noticed the faint blush on her face, and inwardly concluded that she was anything but comfortable. He decided he needed to set a rule to stop the boys from walking around the dorm naked. The next morning, 7 days into the third examination, Yeowun and his followers gathered in the main hall to report that they had acquired the yellow badges. With this confirmation, they were officially acknowledged as group leaders for the third examination. 17 yellow badges existed, yet Chak Sama of the warrior dance sect claimed 2 and did not assign the second to another leader. As a result, group registration closed with 16 groups in total. 15 of the 206 students remained without a group, and they were given 21 days to find one. After breakfast, Yeowun and the others headed to an empty field at the foot of the mountain behind the dormitories. Baekji declared that now that he had become a group leader, he intended to teach his members the 7 demon sword technique. Yeowun reacted with a quiet sound of acknowledgement, but before he could say more, Wang Hul stepped in. Wang Hul suggested that Yeowun was already occupied teaching his own group and that it would be acceptable for the newly appointed leaders to instruct their respective groups themselves. Yeowun hesitated, recognizing immediately that their intentions had little to do with easing his workload. A quiet rivalry had sparked between Baekji and Wang Hul. It had begun subtly during breakfast and intensified as their conversation progressed, eventually leading to a wager over who would master the demon sword formation first. Galen voiced his agreement with Wang Hul, explaining that they already had their own established training methods and wished to continue using them. Yeowun, seeing that their minds were already set, allowed them to proceed as they wished. Baekji immediately claimed a training spot for himself. Wang Hul chose another, warning Baekji not to peek or steal techniques. Baekji scoffed and retorted with the same sentiment. Galen quietly excused himself and moved to a different area, wanting no part in their rivalry. Woman approached Yeowun and explained that he needed to recruit more members for his group. Sanghwa admitted she was in the same situation and then asked Yeowun for permission to leave her current members under his supervision until she could fill all vacant spots. Yeowun agreed without hesitation, assuring them there was nothing to worry about. Woman and Sanghwa then departed to continue their recruitment. As they left, Yeowun reflected on their situation. Recruiting was not simply a matter of selecting people. They would have to persuade other cadets to join their groups, which would take time. He acknowledged that this could not be helped. His thoughts briefly shifted to Baekji, who also needed more members. But knowing Baekji disliked receiving help from others, Yeowun trusted he would manage on his own. 17 cadets soon lined up with wooden swords in their hands. Munku observed that with so many members, it seemed young Master Yeowun was struggling to oversee everyone properly. Hobum watched Yeowun with excitement, eager to finally receive direct instruction from him. Yeowun wondered if he should begin. Since it was his first time teaching others, a sense of nervousness settled over him. He then rose slowly and announced that he would begin with a demonstration. As the cadets focused their attention on him, Yeowun prepared his stance and unleashed the flowing movements of the 7 demon sword. Yeowun moved slowly and deliberately, ensuring that every cadet could study each detail of the technique. The moment his demonstration began, the students stared in awe. The technique was new to all of them, yet he performed it with flawless execution. His movements matched the descriptions in the skill book perfectly. Most martial artists displayed imperfections when practicing a newly learned form, but Yeowun moved as though he had been training in the art for decades. Munku silently questioned how such a thing was possible. She knew he had spent 5 out of the 7 days in the detention center, and yet his form showed no weakness. She considered herself a fast learner, but even she could not imagine performing a new sword technique with such precision so quickly. Yeowun finished his demonstration and reminded the group that he assumed they had paid close attention. The cadets responded with determination. He then announced that he would help each of them refine their form and instructed them to perform the 7 demon sword technique for him. His members erupted with excitement at the idea of receiving personal guidance. Hobum eagerly asked who would be allowed to go first, but Yeowun looked back at him in confusion. He explained that they would all perform the technique simultaneously so they could progress efficiently. If he coached them one by one, the training would go on endlessly. Everyone froze in confusion. They all recognized Yeowun's strength, but none of them could imagine how he planned to observe the detailed movements of so many cadets at once. Yeowun instructed them again to perform the 7 demon sword technique together. Munku watched with concern, thinking that while Yeowun might be able to guide the group toward completing the sword formation as a whole, it seemed impossible for any human to correct each individual's form simultaneously. She considered keeping watch from the side to assist him if needed. Hobam, sensing everyone's hesitation, encouraged the group to try it anyway, and the cadets reluctantly agreed. Yeowun commanded them to begin the first form. He then activated the Nano Machine, ordering it to use augmented reality and tutorial mode to analyze all 17 members' execution of the 7 demon sword technique and alert him to any mistakes. Nano responded immediately and activated multi-tutorial mode for all 17 targets. As its voice resonated in Yeowun's mind, 17 circles appeared in his vision, each one tracking a different cadet. Yeowun then called out the start of the first formation. The cadets echoed the command and moved into the first sword technique together. Moon-koo quietly noted the mistakes spreading through the group. Many cadets were performing the technique incorrectly. She prepared to send Yeowun a telepathic message about the few she had managed to observe, but Yeowun spoke before she could. He stated that he would begin calling out numbers. He addressed the 31st cadet first, explaining that the cadet's arm weakened at the start of the first sword, causing every connected movement to falter. The cadet Kinming acknowledged the correction immediately. Yeowun then called out the 23rd cadet, Hobam. He pointed out that Hobam's sword dropped during the transition, and that during the third movement, Hobam relied only on his wrist while stepping with the right foot. Yeowun instructed him to use his waist instead. Hobam responded gratefully. Moon-koo was stunned. Hobam had been one of the cadets she had personally observed, and Yeowun's corrections matched exactly what she had seen. She wondered if he had truly perceived every individual mistake. After Yeowun addressed all 17 cadets, the group began to trust the process. He instructed them to repeat the first formation, reminding them to correct the flaws he had pointed out. As they moved again, their forms improved noticeably, even if not perfectly. Moon-koo gasped softly, astonished by the progress and silently acknowledging Yeowun's remarkable ability. Yeowun observed their efforts and noted that none of them seemed careless enough to repeat their earlier mistakes. He believed that with continued guidance, 7 days would be more than enough. However, perfecting the 7 demon sword technique took longer than anticipated. Students from sects managed to master it within 7 days, but those from martial artist families required more time, especially with the intricate final technique, the 7th sword. There was also the delay caused by Ojong, who joined late after spending 5 days hospitalized. Fortunately, Ojong possessed a natural talent for martial arts and managed to master the technique within 5 days. 10 days later, the groups that had scattered to train separately gathered again. Baek-ji admitted defeat with irritation and turned away, while Wang Hul burst into triumphant laughter, pleased to have won their wager. Baek-ji questioned how Wang Hul had managed to train his members within 7 days when even Galen had required 9. Wang Hul replied that it had been simple for him. He had forced the technique into them through sheer intensity of training. When he glanced back at his own group with a grin, his cadets flinched in fear, confirming his words. During those 10 days, the progress made by Yeowun's faction extended beyond mastering the 7 demon sword technique. Baek-ji, Sanghwa, and Wooman had all succeeded in filling their groups at last, and several new members showed genuine potential to become group leaders in the future. 2 individuals stood out among the recruits. The first was Student 78, Taek Gyeom Chai of the Westgate sect, who volunteered to join. The second was Student 52, Sojung Woo of the Demonic Heat sect, brought in by Sanghwa. Sojung expressed a straightforward philosophy, stating that in a place governed by survival of the fittest, loyalty would be earned only if one could prove superior skill. To secure her allegiance, Yeowun demonstrated the dancing butterfly technique. Sojung was defeated within 3 forms. With that, 2 early Ascendant Masters joined as Yeowun's followers. Over the same 10 days, both Wang Hul and Sanghwa dedicated themselves to continuous training and entered the early stages of Ascendant Master as well. Yeowun congratulated Wang Hul and Sanghwa for reaching the Ascendant Master level. Sanghwa felt genuine joy at becoming a Master level warrior, while Wang Hul remained unsatisfied and vowed to work harder so he could become Yeowun's first sword. His declaration sparked an odd sense of competition among the cadets. As the number of members increased, they began forming their own unofficial rankings. Yi Chan from Baek-ji's group stated that the first sword title suited Baek-ji or Moon-koo more. Other members of Baek-ji's group agreed, pointing out that their leaders were stronger. Wang Hul's members immediately pushed back, insisting that Wang Hul was worthy of the title and demanding recognition. They argued he could at least be considered the second or third sword. Voices rose as members from different groups argued over who deserved which rank, surprising all the leaders. Amid the noise, Yeowun heard a telepathic message from Chae Takim. He explained that with so many loyal followers, competition was inevitable, and that Yeowun needed to establish a hierarchy. He reminded him that while loyalty mattered, the cult valued power, and he needed to keep that in mind. Yeowun considered his advice carefully. A clear hierarchy was necessary to lead a large group, yet the third examination was approaching. If the cadets injured one another in their disputes, it would weaken their collective strength. After thinking it through, he made his decision. Yeowun called for silence, and the cadets immediately obeyed. He told them he understood their feelings and would use this situation to establish a hierarchy. He announced that he would select 6 of the most skilled individuals, all equal in status, who would serve as the 6 leaders, his 6 swords. Sojung raised her hand and asked why he had chosen the number 6. Yeowun explained that once they graduated from the academy, they would eventually face the 6th sex, and he needed 6 swords at the front lines to confront them. Wanghul and several others frowned at the implication of Yeowun's new system. If the 6 swords eventually replaced the 6 clans, it could create another power struggle in the distant future. But Yeowun continued, dispelling their concern. He announced that the 6 swords would not remain fixed positions forever. Each year there would be open competition, allowing stronger warriors to claim the titles. The announcement stirred excitement among the cadets. Baekji reflected inwardly that if Yeowun truly maintained such a system after earning the minor priesthood and becoming the cult leader, it could finally dismantle the authority of the 6th sex and the oppressive control they held. Yeowun then raised his hand and redirected their focus to the upcoming 3rd examination. He explained that, for now, he would keep the selection simple. Anyone who had not yet reached at least the early stage of Ascendant Master was instructed to step back. Most cadets retreated, leaving only Wanghul, Baekji, Moonku, Sanghwa, Takim, and Sojung standing. Yeowun asked if anyone objected to these 6 becoming the 6 swords. The remaining cadets responded unanimously that they did not. Yeowun began to announce the first sword, but Baekji raised his hand to interrupt. He proposed that since the 6 swords had now been chosen, they should determine the ranking among themselves. Sojung agreed, stating that their ranks should be decided through their own strength. Yeowun acknowledged their point and agreed to let the 6 swords determine their own ranks. However, he reminded them that he did not want anyone seriously injured before the 3rd examination, so he instructed everyone to suppress their internal power to the level of 3 stars. Moonku announced that she had not fully recovered and would forfeit. Baekji expressed disappointment, saying he had hoped to spar with her. Moonku replied that they could have a real match the following year. With that settled, the ranking match began. Wanghul removed his top and flexed in an attempt to boost his morale, but the display only disgusted Sanghwa and Sojung. The sight of him made them decide instantly to target him first. They declared that they would eliminate him before anyone else, and Wanghul laughed as the fight began. The 5 warriors clashed fiercely. The first to fall was Sojung, who admitted her shame at losing to Sanghwa. The next was Takim, who had joined the clash between Baekji and Wanghul, but was struck down by their combined blows. Sanghwa eventually reached her limit about 30 minutes later and sank to the ground in exhaustion. She believed she had solid stamina, but she could not endure as long as Baekji or Wanghul. Baekji and Wanghul fought with relentless intensity. Their rivalry had pushed them for months, and neither wished to yield. Their groups shouted encouragement from the sidelines, but in the end, experience and technique decided the outcome. Baekji focused his energy into his leg and delivered a powerful kick that brought down Wanghul's massive frame. Wanghul attempted to resist by relying on brute strength, but he could not overcome the force of Baekji's energy. He collapsed onto his back, panting heavily, and admitted defeat. Baekji's group erupted in celebration, while Wanghul's members sank in disappointment. With the match concluded, the ranks of the 6 swords were officially determined. Baekji will be the 1st sword, Ko Wanghul the 2nd, Ho Sanghwa 3rd, Chae Takim 4th, Woo Sojung 5th, and Moonku will be the 6th. Thus, Cheon Yeowun's 6 swords were born. Yeowun watched his members with a tightening fist. He had arrived at the academy with nothing, yet now he commanded a force that could not be overlooked, especially given the powerful clans standing behind many of them, but he was not satisfied. He resolved that he needed to grow even stronger than anyone else, so that no one within the demonic cult would ever dare to defy him. The days allotted for training before the 3rd test passed swiftly, filled with countless developments and preparations. As dawn approached on the day of the examination, an unexpected visitor appeared in the chief's office. The left guardian held a stack of documents, his displeasure clear as he examined them. He questioned whether the contents had truly been approved. Markham explained that the decision had been made 2 days earlier during a meeting of their leaders, and the Patriarch had given his final seal of approval the previous day. To prevent the possibility of information leaking, every examination after the first was determined only after the cadets had already entered the academy. The academy deputy and the martial arts professors created each test and reported their decisions in a council meeting. The examinations were then approved by the cult's elders, and only after that did the Patriarch give his final authorization. Although there had been occasional requests to adjust examinations due to various issues, no request had ever been made on the day of the examination itself. Hameng silently reflected on the situation. Never in the cult's history had there been a request for an examination change so so late, and the reason given, that the test was too complacent, seemed absurd. With the patriarch's recent policies aimed at suppressing the sixth sex, Hameng found it suspicious that he had approved something like this. Nothing about the situation felt right. The Great Guardian, who rarely spoke, remained silent but took out another document and handed it to Hameng. It was a letter. Hameng read it, scowled, and then burned it to ash, muttering his acceptance of the order. He concluded inwardly that the sixth sex were attempting to use the third examination as part of some scheme. Whatever they intended, he believed it would ultimately lead to their downfall. Hours later, all cadets gathered at the training ground for the third test. Yeowun's group stood with confidence. He reflected that despite the difficulties along the way, every member had mastered the Sword Demon's decimating formations, and he felt assured of their performance. Yet something felt odd. They had been waiting for more than 15 minutes, and usually the professors were present before the cadets arrived. This time, none of them were in sight. At last, someone pointed out their approach. Lee Hameng and the instructors descended from the building. Hameng took his place on the stage, but the instructors brought additional figures bound tightly with ropes. Their heads were covered with black rags, and they were dragged forward like criminals. The scene made all the cadets fall silent. Confusion spread through the ranks as they watched in uneasy stillness. Hameng addressed them, asking whether they had trained hard for the third examination over the past 20 days. The cadets answered in unison. He then announced that there would be a last-minute change before the test began. The cadets murmured nervously as they sensed the unexpected change had everything to do with the bound figures on the stage. Their unease deepened when Hameng snapped his fingers and instructors carried out 3 large wooden boxes. When the lids opened, real swords spilled out, gleaming under the morning light. Confusion spread instantly. Many cadets had expected to use wooden swords for the test. Hameng continued without addressing their worry. He explained that the original task was to defeat the professors using the Sword Demon's decimating formations. That part remained mostly unchanged. They still had to defeat an opponent using the formations, but now their opponents were the bound prisoners standing before them. These individuals belonged to the martial arts alliance of both the righteous and evil factions. To pass the examination, merely defeating them would not suffice. Each cadet would have to kill their opponent. This would be their first real combat, and if any prisoner managed to defeat a cadet, that prisoner would earn freedom. Therefore, they would show no restraint. Fear rippled through the cadets at the harsh announcement. Hameng proceeded with the examination, calling forth the 700th cadet, Sama Chak, and his group. Sama stepped out and retrieved his sword. Instructors untied the first prisoner and released the pressure on his blood point, restoring his ability to use martial arts. Hameng commanded them to begin. 12 cadets formed the 7 demon sword stance and moved to surround the prisoner. Some of them were disciplined and focused, while others trembled in fear. The prisoner, despite being a martial artist, felt a flicker of dread as he faced children forced to fight for their survival. Samachak steadied himself, accepting that there was no other choice. He took a deep breath and commanded his group to unleash the third formation. The 12 cadets moved in unison, sending coordinated sword strikes toward the prisoner. The man was stunned by their determination, realizing immediately that the children were not holding back. Yeowun watched closely, noting how perfectly each cadet mirrored the partner opposite them. They had truly mastered the technique. Otherwise, they might have misunderstood the manual and believed that attacking with the same form alone was sufficient. Despite the coordinated assault, the prisoner managed to defend himself. His experience allowed him to respond to attacks coming from every angle, but as blades grazed him, one slash finally tore across his upper torso, causing blood to burst from the wound. He realized his long confinement had weakened him. His body had been frozen for too long, and he could not execute his martial forms properly. Samachak ordered the second formation. The group attempted it, but several cadets collided in their haste, disrupting the arrangement. The prisoner saw his chance and drove his sword toward a cadet's chest. The young boy froze and shut his eyes, expecting death, but the prisoner faltered. He could not bring himself to kill a child. That single moment of hesitation sealed his fate. Swords pierced into him from behind, driving through his organs and into his heart. He collapsed instantly. Some cadets dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by their first kill. Samachak stared at the corpse and bit his lip, unable to feel victorious. Still, the group shouted in triumph, glad to have passed the test. Their relief, however, was short-lived. The announcement echoed through the hall as the results were revealed. Shock rippled across the field. Only 7 names had been called. The remaining remaining 5, those who had collided during the formation, stared in disbelief. They had helped kill the prisoner and assumed the group's victory meant everyone would pass. But the reality struck them harshly. Their mistakes had cost them everything. Yeowun frowned. The test was executed as a group, but the results were judged individually. A single flaw meant failure. Next was Mukum Chun's group. Their opponent, a skilled martial artist of the evil faction, struck first before the group could even begin their initial formation. The cadets attempted to counter with the 5th formation as a defensive maneuver, but the enemy shifted his technique and severed a student's arm in a single clean strike. Fear spread among the group. Their hesitation created openings, allowing the martial artist to disrupt their formations repeatedly. He pushed them into chaos, exploiting every moment of weakness. But Mukum waited, watching closely for the precise instant the man lowered his guard. When the chance appeared, he launched forward with the Fists of Stealth technique, stopping the man's advance. 5 students remained capable of continuing. They moved together, carried out the first formation, and struck the martial artist down. In the end, only 6 members, including Mukum Chun, passed the test. Half of his followers had been lost, including student 80, Jaehun, one of his most loyal men. The third group faced a martial artist of the righteous faction. Their opponent unleashed his full strength without restraint, and injuries piled up quickly among the cadets. Only 3 members survived long enough to complete the formations and pass. 5 more groups took their turns afterward, each battling desperately to stay alive. Many cadets fell, and many more failed. Among all of them, only one group managed to have every member pass, the group led by Cheon Yeowun of the Shadow Sect. Hameng watched the previous battles closely. Nothing unusual had occurred yet, which led him to conclude that the true target, Cheon Yeowun, had not stepped forward. He believed the 6 sects could not wait 4 full years. 2 candidates for the minor priesthood had already lost their arms, and one had suffered devastating abdominal damage. If the 6 sects had their way, they would have killed the true threat immediately. But with the Patriarch maintaining strict control over them, they could not openly violate Academy rules. Instead, they attempted to hide their intentions behind a sudden change in the examination format. Hameng, however, doubted things would unfold as they expected. He then called for the next group to step forward, announcing the 7th cadet, Cheon Yeowun, and his followers. Hoba muttered in despair, while Jinga gasped, both imagining the worst. The instructors removed the mask from the criminal's face, revealing a long beard, sharp eyes, and an aggressive expression. His body remained tightly bound, and his blood points were sealed to restrain him. The man scanned the faces of Yeowun's group, searching for someone specific. Yeowun narrowed his eyes. Most prisoners showed fear, desperation, or frantic tension when facing the examination, but this man seemed different. A brief telepathic message from Hojin Chang reached him to be careful. That warning confirmed Yeowun's suspicion that something was wrong. Yeowun searched for the cause of the unease tightening in his chest. The sudden change in the examination, the unnatural calmness of the prisoner, and the tension lingering in the air all hinted at something hidden. Whatever it was, he needed to watch every detail carefully. With Lee Hameng's command, the test began. Yeowun's group shouted together and took their positions for the 7 demon sword, yet the bearded man remained motionless. Even surrounded, he neither panicked nor attacked. Instead, he quietly steadied his stance, as though waiting for something specific. Yeowun sensed that the man was prepared for any opening. He ordered the 4th formation. At that moment, the prisoner snapped his gaze toward Yeowun with sharp, predatory focus, the look of a hunter who had finally spotted his target. But before he could move, 12 swords rushed toward him in perfect coordination. The formation was flawless, equal to the level demonstrated by Muyon's group. However, the man showed no concern. His blade moved with astonishing speed, effortlessly blocking every strike. His movements were so fast they blurred beyond the naked eye. Hobam and Jin-guk recoiled in shock as the force from his sword sent their blades flying backward. The man shouted, and a burst of clear chi erupted from his weapon, shattering every sword that came into contact with it. Hameng rose from his chair in shock as he sensed the truth. The prisoner was not a master-level warrior at all. He was an ascendant master. Baekji and Wang Hul immediately sensed the same thing. Something was terribly wrong. Hojin Chang realized it as well. If the opponent was not master-level, the examination had to be stopped. He shouted for the cadets to fall back and rush forward, unleashing his sword technique to intercept the bearded man. The man grabbed Mashiel by the neck and hurled him directly at Jin Chang. Jin Chang abandoned his attack and caught Mashiel, but the force behind the throw was immense. Both of them were sent flying backward by the overwhelming energy. Even Jin Chang, who had reached the threshold of the Grandmaster level, was unable to defend against it. The watching cadets were stunned. The technique the man had used was unmistakable. It was the demonic blood reversal art. The bearded man then turned toward Yeowun and growled that he would kill him. Yeowun met his murderous intent with a cold, unwavering glare. He understood now. This had been the plan all along. The man studied him with confusion. According to the instructions he had received, Cheon Yeowun was supposed to be nothing more than a child barely at the master level, yet the boy did not retreat. Instead, he stared back without the slightest trace of fear. The man roared that he would kill Yeowun as painfully as possible and unleashed a devastating strike. The force tore through the air, powerful enough to cut Yeowun into pieces. But before the attack could reach him, Yeowun's voice echoed sharply in the man's ears, cold and unwavering. Yeowun declared that the one who would die was not him. In the same instant, Yeowun's sword erupted with a brilliant white chi. 24 sword movements surged out like a raging storm. The man's eyes widened in disbelief as his own strike was instantly neutralized. Yeowun's body cut past him at blinding speed. A violent cry escaped the man as the torrent of chi ripped through his blood points. His body spun wildly through the air before crashing down, drenched in blood and unmoving. The cadets stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Mukam trembled, thinking that what he had seen was beyond human, that Yeowun was a monster. Yeowun, however, remained tense. He could tell immediately that his sword had not pierced all the way through. The enemy's body was sturdier than expected. The corpse-like figure on the ground twitched. Yeowun realized the attack had not finished him. The man rose, his body swelling grotesquely. His eyes burned with rage as he glared at Yeowun, growling like a wild beast. The man unleashed a violent roar, sending a wave of sound energy tearing across the field. Cadets cried out and clutched their ears in agony, overwhelmed by the painful vibration. But Yeowun, protected by Nano's abilities, remained completely unaffected. The man's eyes narrowed with frustration when he realized Yeowun was still standing. The prisoner growled that surviving his beastly roar confirmed it. Yeowun had to die here. Yeowun raised his sword calmly and stated that they could discuss it if the man survived what came next. The prisoner charged, screaming for Yeowun's death. But before he could reach him, a sudden shriek of pain tore through the air. The man's left arm flew off, severed cleanly. Yeowun's eyes widened. Standing behind the screaming man was an unexpected figure, Right Guardian Submeng. Submeng stood behind the injured man with a cold grin, warning him never to lay filthy hands on his apprentice. The prisoner roared and swung towards Submeng in fury, but Submeng only smirked, remarking that he had been ordered to bring the man back alive. Though not necessarily in good condition, he wielded his crazy blade with effortless dominance, cutting through every attack and slicing into the man's muscles with precision. The once towering figure collapsed helplessly, his body falling limp like a broken doll. Yeowun was struck with awe. The butterfly blade dance, when executed by a warrior of Submeng's level, displayed overwhelming strength. Far beyond what Yeowun had experienced through the Avatar simulation, Submeng's mastery multiplied the technique's power several-fold. The man attempted to rise again with a guttural growl, but his efforts were useless. Submeng seized him by the hair and yanked him upward. He warned him that reversing his internal power to self-destruct would not be allowed. Before the man could attempt anything, Submeng sent a concentrated burst of energy through his skull, instantly knocking him unconscious. Submeng rose and shouted toward the stage, mocking the delay and claiming the instructors were taking too long dealing with weak enemies. Hameng bristled with irritation and demanded to know what he had said. Several men lay collapsed on the stage with their upper clothes shredded, the same type of fighters who had attacked Yeowun earlier. Hameng snapped that Submeng had only taken down one opponent and had no right to boast, calling him a drunkard. The cadets whispered among themselves in disbelief. Hameng had taken down 7 enemies in an instant, and none of them had even noticed when it happened. They murmured that this must be the strength of a Genesis master. Submeng simply scoffed, complaining about Hameng's condescending tone. Hameng then snapped his fingers. Warriors in dark clothing with blue crests appeared from all directions. Their presence shocked the cadets as none of them had sensed their arrival. There were 40 in total, and some cadets immediately recognized them. They were the Guardian Army, master-level warriors from the Lord's Palace who obeyed only the Lord's commands. Hameng ordered them to tie up and take away all prisoners who had used the demonic blood reversal art. The warriors obeyed immediately. Submeng approached Yeowun and greeted him with a familiar grin. Yeowun bowed respectfully, and Submeng remarked that it had been a long time. Submeng teased him about not using the dancing butterfly technique he had taught. Yeowun could only respond with silence, unsure how to reply. Submeng didn't didn't seem angry, only curious, as though he wanted to ask more about the sword technique Yeowun had used. Before he could, Hameng stepped forward and cleared his throat. Through a telepathic message, Hameng instructed Submeng to stay quiet about the sword technique. No one could be allowed to discover it, and the third examination was not yet over. Submeng looked around and noticed the many cadets still watching. He then announced that it was time for him to leave and wished Yeowun luck, saying he looked forward to seeing him pass. Yeowun thanked him. Submeng then leapt away and departed from the academy grounds. Yeowun watched his teacher disappear into the distance, knowing he would not see him again for 4 years, and he silently promised that when they met again, he would have already secured the minor priesthood. Meanwhile, Submeng left the academy grounds and cast one final glance back toward it. Thoughts churned within him as he pieced together everything he had witnessed. He questioned what the patriarch was truly planning. From the way Yeowun had been used as bait in the trap, Submeng had assumed the patriarch didn't see him as a son at all, but merely as a piece on a larger board. Yet the technique Yeowun unleashed moments earlier lingered in Submeng's mind. From his hidden vantage point, he hadn't seen it clearly, but its essence felt unmistakably similar to the patriarch's demonic lord's sword art. If the red-haired jerk also recognized it, then perhaps this entire ordeal had indeed been orchestrated by the patriarch. Submeng considered the implications. If the patriarch truly had another purpose for Yeowun, something deeper hidden behind layers of schemes, then it could very well herald a complete revolution within the demonic cult. A smirk crossed Submeng's face. He had other matters to attend to. He gave the order to move. 300 warriors of the Guardian army followed behind him in perfect formation as they charged forward under his lead, heading straight toward the Sword Clan's mansion. The chaos gradually subsided as the cadets regrouped. Hobum rushed to Mashiel with worry, asking if he was alright. Mashiel assured him that thanks to Professor Ho catching him, he had avoided any major injuries. Yeowun stood apart, lost in heavy thought. It was the first time the 6 clans had come after him publicly, openly violating the rules of the cult. They had not even bothered to hide it. The realization unsettled him. If Submeng and the Guardian army had been waiting in advance, then those in power must have anticipated this attack. A bitter thought settled within him. He had been used, a pawn in someone else's strategy. His disappointment deepened as he remembered the Lord had not even attended Lady Hua's funeral. Doubt crept in. Had the Lord ever cared for his mother at all? Lady Hua had believed in the Lord's love. Even on her deathbed, Yeowun had resisted questioning her faith out of respect for her memory. But now the suspicion could no longer be suppressed. If the Lord had truly cared, would he have allowed her to die poisoned? Would he have left Yeowun defenseless all those years when he had the authority to protect them? Distrust spread like ice through Yeowun's heart. If the Lord had used both him and Lady Hua as political pawns in the struggle against the 6 clans, then Yeowun could not forgive him. Yeowun clenched his fist as a cold resolve took shape within him. He would make the Lord regret it. As Yeowun wrestled with anger toward the Lord, Left Guardian Li Hameng reflected deeply on the events that had unfolded. He reviewed the recent punishments within the cult. Hang Soyu, the head of the musician sect, 5th elder of the demonic warrior cult, and the one responsible for causing casualties during the first examination out of spite, had been placed under house arrest for a year. Beiko, head of the poison sect, had been sentenced to 2 years of confinement for entering the academy without permission and poisoning Yeowun. Then there was the matter of the Great Warrior Sword Sect, one of the 2 hidden shadow sword sects tied to the main sword sect. They were responsible for managing the demonic cult's prisoners and had now been found linked to the forbidden demonic blood reversal art. Such a violation would unquestionably strip them of their standing. The problem was not only their guilt, but how easily they had been exposed. The sects feared Yeowun's rapid growth and the possibility of him claiming the minor priesthood, but this elaborate commotion felt excessive. Even for them, the situation carried the same troubling unease as the poisoning of Lady Hua. Hameng could not shake the ominous feeling settling in his gut. Once the chaos was contained, Hameng stepped back onto the stage to resume the 3rd test. He announced that Cheon Yeowun's group had flawlessly executed the Sword Demon's decimating formations and that all of them had passed. Despite the disruption, the examination needed to continue. He declared that the remaining students would now face the professors instead of prisoners. The cadets responded with discipline and readiness. Hobum sighed, saying they must have been the last of the unlucky groups. Still, he considered it fortunate that 4 of the 7 remaining groups belonged to Yeowun Yeowun's faction. But contrary to Hobum's expectation, the remaining 7 groups faced far harsher evaluation. The professors who knew the 7 demons' sword technique and the sword demons' decimating formations better than anyone held nothing back. Their precision left no room for error. By the time the test ended, only 120 of the 206 cadets had passed. Yeowun had chosen his followers purely for their loyalty, and among his 72 supporters, 38 failed due to insufficient skill. Hameng then congratulated the successful students, declaring them officially high warriors of the demonic cult. He announced that they now had permission to use their personal special weapons, the ones they had submitted upon entering the academy. The cadets responded with pride as they received medals engraved to signify their new status. They were also given the 3rd Black Dragon Ball and their weapons. Hobum's eyes sparkled with delight at the medal. Sanghwa embraced her returned weapon and called it her baby, shocking everyone. The giant axe she held was taller than a grown man, an impossible weapon for most cadets to even lift. The instructors then called out to the students who did not own a weapon, instructing them to step forward and receive one. Yeowun considered the idea of a special weapon. Submeng had once explained that to draw out the true strength of the dancing butterfly technique, he needed to wield the Mad Blade, the signature weapon of his sect. Yeowun wondered if a similar weapon existed that would perfectly complement the demonic lord's sword art. After receiving their medals, Black Dragon Balls, and weapons, the cadets regrouped at the training ground and lined up. Hameng surveyed them before speaking. He admitted that he had once seen them all as inexperienced children, but they had now proven themselves worthy of training. He then announced the rules for the next examination. Starting from the 4th examination, there would be no more time limits. Cadets could take the exam whenever they wished, provided it was within their 4 years at the academy. The revelation astonished them. They had finally been freed from rigid deadlines. Hameng continued. The 4th examination was the simplest test in the academy. Cadets could use any weapon or martial art they desired. With no restrictions to pass, they needed only to defeat one of the professors standing before them. The instructors swept their gazes across the cadets, silently reminding them of the challenge. The cadets stiffened. It had taken 12 of them using a formation to defeat a single professor earlier. The thought of facing one alone carried only one implication. Yeowun realized that defeating a professor individually meant they would need to reach the level of Ascendant Master at minimum. Anyone who had not awakened to their own internal energy would fail instantly. The 4th examination would be the true test that cut away the weak. Hameng reminded the cadets of the academy's most important rule. Even a single failure in any examination meant immediate expulsion. He wished them luck and dismissed them. The cadets responded together and scattered across the grounds. Yeowun and his followers remained where they were. They gathered to say farewell to the members who had failed the test. Those leaving expressed their gratitude to Yeowun, thanking him for everything and acknowledging that they would not have even reached the examination without him. Some promised to wait for him outside the academy. One by one, they bowed and exchanged farewells. As the group parted, a voice suddenly called out Yeowun's number from behind. Everyone turned. The one calling him was Instructor Sung Moonyo. Hobum whispered that this was the professor whose ribs Yeowun had broken and who had been hospitalized for 22 days because of it. Wang Hul quickly hushed him. Sung Moonyo ordered Yeowun to follow him to the main annex. Yeowun asked if something was wrong, but Moonyo glared and reminded him that a mere student had no right to question a professor. Yeowun complied. He assumed the chief had summoned him because of the earlier incident. He instructed his members to return without him and followed Moonyo. However, instead of entering the main annex, Moonyo walked past it and headed toward a restricted building. They stopped in an isolated area where no one else was present. Moonyo declared the place suitable. Yeowun immediately sensed something was off and realized the chief had not called for him. Moonyo grinned wickedly and asked if he had ever said anything about the chief wanting to see him. When Yeowun demanded to know what this was about, Moonyo answered by declaring a challenge. He announced that he was challenging Yeowun to the 4th examination right here and right now. Inwardly, Moonyo seethed. He had waited for the moment Yeowun passed the 3rd test. Yeowun had humiliated him in front of everyone, destroying his dignity and sending him to a sickbed for 20 days. Now he saw Yeowun as nothing more than a brat barely at the early stage of Ascendant Master. If he were allowed to use his special technique, he believed he could have ended Yeowun in moments. Instead, he planned to beat him until he was mute and then claim Yeowun had challenged him first. With that, Moonyo dashed and struck without warning, his blade slicing toward Yeowun's neck. But just Just as the edge was about to reach him, Yeowun's sword intercepted the attack. The movement was so swift that Munyo froze in disbelief, his eyes widening as he glared at Yeowun. Yeowun met his stare with a cold smile, telling him not to take back the words he had just spoken. Munyo stammered in confusion, unable to grasp how his surprise attack had been stopped so effortlessly. Yeowun's grin deepened as he reminded him that he was the one who had declared this as the fourth test, and not to forget that. Munyo no longer heard anything Yeowun said. Rage clouded his thoughts. He poured all of his internal energy into his arm, trying to overpower Yeowun and force him back, but Yeowun did not move an inch. The only thing that trembled was Munyo's own hand gripping the blade. Munyo felt a surge of panic. Yeowun's strength was far greater than it had been 20 days earlier. Before he could process it, a burst of energy erupted from Yeowun's sword, repelling Munyo's blade with such force that pain shot through his hand. He stumbled backward, stunned. He wondered how Yeowun, who had barely reached the early Ascendant Master stage, had gained such alarming strength in such a short time. Munyo tried to recover his confidence and shouted that he would no longer hold back. Yeowun shrugged dismissively. The gesture provoked Munyo even further. Enraged, he infused his blade with chi and charged forward. With a sharp cry, he unleashed the agile saber slash. His blade split into two arcs of force, cutting down at Yeowun from both sides at once. Yeowun noted the speed of Munyo's technique, but it was still far slower than the butterfly blade dance. His body spun with smooth precision, and the blade in his hand traced a clean arc that intercepted Munyo's descending strike. It was the second formation of the butterfly blade dance. Munyo's eyes widened in disbelief. He could not understand how Yeowun had blocked it. His shock deepened when he noticed the clear white chi glowing along Yeowun's blade. Munyo realized that Yeowun possessed saber energy as well, that he had already mastered the Ascendant Master stage. Any ordinary technique would be useless. He attempted to retreat, but Yeowun moved first. Like a flash of lightning, Yeowun charged forward and unleashed the sixth formation of the butterfly blade dance. Munyo cried out as he tried to defend, but the blade pattern swirled around him like a butterfly's trail, its movements too fast for his eyes to follow. His weapon was knocked aside violently, tearing open his palm. The formation did not slow, and Munyo panicked. He shouted that he surrendered and acknowledged Yeowun's victory, begging him to stop. Yeowun halted his blade just short of Munyo's nose. Munyo panted heavily, drenched in sweat. Yeowun asked whether he had passed the fourth test. Munyo raised both hands and stammered that Yeowun had indeed won and that the match should end there. But in his mind, Munyo had no intention of allowing Yeowun to pass. He planned to wait until Yeowun lowered his guard and sheathed his saber. Then he would unleash the 10-star energy he had secretly preserved and tear Yeowun apart. Yeowun slid his blade back into its scabbard. The moment Munyo saw it, he narrowed his eyes and lunged from behind. Before his attack could land, Yeowun's fist struck him squarely, blasting him backward. Munyo's body spun through the air like a frisbee before crashing to the ground with a heavy impact. Munyo stared at Yeowun in disbelief, unable to understand how his attempt had failed so easily. Yeowun told him calmly that if he had intended to lie, he should have concealed the energy gathering in his hand. Munyo stuttered, horrified that Yeowun had sensed it. In that moment, he finally realized that his own strength was nowhere near enough to handle Yeowun. He crawled backward in fear, begging and insisting that he was truly surrendering this time, claiming he accepted defeat. Before he could finish speaking, Yeowun brought his foot down on Munyo's right rib. The bones cracked loudly under the pressure. Munyo screamed and hurriedly tried to promise he would report Yeowun's victory to the Academy deputy, but Yeowun dismissed the plea. He told Munyo it was too late. Then he crushed the ribs on the left side as well. An hour later, the instructors gathered in the chief's office to prepare their reports on the third test. Instead, they found themselves looking down with sympathy at the battered, whimpering figure of instructor Sung Munyo, who lay slumped on the floor. Yeowun had carried him in on his shoulder earlier. Hameng sat in his chair, embarrassed and irritated as he looked down at the man. The instructors around him shook their heads, remarking that Munyo had brought this upon himself. Attempting revenge on a student was disgraceful, and he had dug his own grave with his actions. Hameng quietly assessed the situation. He did not need to hear Sung Munyo's excuses. The fourth examination required defeating a professor, and Yeowun had done exactly that. More importantly, Yeowun had held back. Hameng understood that Munyo had attacked with clear malicious intent, but if Yeowun had gone all out and revealed his true power, the professors might have begun to look at him with suspicion. Instead, Yeowun had limited the damage to breaking ribs, just enough to avoid exposing his full strength. Hameng noted how quickly Yeowun was learning to judge situations and act with calculated restraint. Jin Chang stated that regardless of circumstances, Yeowun had passed. Hameng agreed, saying it had only been a matter of time. He opened his desk, took out something, and ordered the instructors to carry Sung Munyo to the infirmary. The instructors bowed and carried the broken man away. He then handed Yeowun a silver medal engraved with the letter L, the symbol of a squad leader. He approached Yeowun and removed the black number tag from his chest. He congratulated him for passing the 4th test in record time and acknowledged that in just 2 months, Yeowun had risen to a position equal to that of the instructors themselves. Impyeong stepped forward and presented the reward. He congratulated Captain Chun and handed him the demonic dragon marble. Yeowun accepted it with a respectful bow. Impyeong explained that Yeowun would receive 2 additional benefits for passing the 4th examination. The first was a personal dormitory. Yeowun reacted with visible delight, which made Impyeong laugh and remarked that he must have truly wanted his own room. The second benefit required him to visit the forge at the north side of the academy at around 10 a.m. When Yeowun asked about the forge, Jin Chang clarified that passing the 4th examination entitled him to have a weapon forged specifically to his choosing. He noted that this seemed like the perk Yeowun needed most. Yeowun agreed inwardly. He had grown uncomfortable sharing a room with Munku, and he needed a special weapon. This solved both problems at once. Hameng then moved on to explain the rules for the 5th examination. To take it, one had to pass through the sealed demonic chamber, and only those who had completely mastered the stage of Transcendent Master were eligible. Yeowun reflected on the requirement. Mastering the Transcendent Master stage would place someone among the top 100 martial artists in the entire demonic cult. He still had 3 stages to climb. He wondered what kind of place the sealed demonic chamber was if it demanded such a level of power. He concluded that it would take time before he was ready. Hameng added that throughout the academy's long history, only a small number of cohorts ever produced more than 10 students capable of passing the 5th examination. He warned Yeowun not to rush. Impatience during awakenings would only make each step harder to achieve. He wished Yeowun luck. Yeowun brought his fist to his palm and promised that he would not disappoint. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.